What happened in Hollow Creek was never meant to be spoken again. The town tried to bury it. The mountains tried to swallow it. And anyone who ever dared to tell the truth didn't live long enough to finish the story. But tonight, you will hear it. Because the secret the Hollow Creek sisters kept, the secret that destroyed an entire town in 1892, has started whispering again. And once you hear those whispers, they never leave you. This is Forgotten Remains. And this is the horror of the sisters who birthed their own brothers, and the nightmare that followed. The disappearance of Hollow Creek began with a rumor, one whispered by traveling merchants long before the town vanished from maps, long before its name became a warning carved into rotting signposts. They said the sisters weren't right. They said the Crane girls were born touched by something old, something that lived beneath the dark soil of the Appalachians, something that blessed them, or cursed them, depending on who told the story. But no one truly understood what lived inside those woods. No one except the sisters themselves. On a brittle September morning in 1892, the sheriff of Hollow Creek, Angus Merritt, found a baby on the steps of the old chapel, swaddled in burlap and stained with dark clay from the riverbed. The child was quiet. Too quiet. Its eyes were open, wide, unblinking, staring at the sky like it recognized every cloud. When Angus lifted it, the baby didn't cry. It smiled, and its teeth, small and needle-sharp, clicked together softly. Angus stumbled back, heart pounding. "This ain't natural," he whispered. A voice drifted from the tree line behind him. "Nothing born in Hollow Creek is." He spun around, and there they stood, Maeve and Lyda Crane. The Hollow Creek sisters, barefoot, hair tangled with twigs and river moss, skin pale from days spent in forest shadows, eyes the color of storm water, calm on the surface, furious beneath. Maeve, the older one, stepped forward. "That child doesn't belong to you, Sheriff." Angus shielded the infant instinctively. "Whose is it then?" Lyda's lips curled into a slow, eerie grin. "Ours," she whispered. A chill crawled across Angus's spine. Everyone in Hollow Creek knew the sisters lived alone in the woods. No husbands, no father, no kin, no man ever seen near their land. "Yours?" Angus forced a stiff breath. "Both of you." The sisters gave no answer. They only watched him with an expression he couldn't name. Something ancient. Something patient. Something hungry. Maeve extended a hand toward the bundle. "Give him to us." Angus took a step back. "No." The smile vanished from Maeve's face. The forest behind her seemed to darken. The wind stopped dead. Lyda lowered her voice until it was almost a hiss. "You shouldn't keep a child that isn't meant to survive in daylight." Angus gripped his revolver, the weight of it suddenly meaningless. "What do you mean, survive?" The sisters didn't answer. They only turned, perfectly in sync, and melted into the trees without a sound, as though the forest swallowed them whole. 3 days later, the bell atop the chapel rang on its own. The floors inside were covered in muddy footprints, small ones, like a child crawling. The baptismal basin had been drained, water dripping across the pews in a trail leading to the altar. At its end lay the same burlap blanket, empty. The baby was gone, and carved into the wooden altar with something sharp, almost claw-like, were 3 words. "We took him home." Angus didn't sleep that night. His mind replayed the sisters' faces, their identical smiles, and the way the woods had gone silent as they disappeared. He had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life. The forest never frightened him. Until now, because he finally understood what the town had ignored for years. The sisters were not raising children. They were making them. From what? Or from whom? No one knew. Or no one dared to say. And that was only the beginning. The next morning, a hunter stumbled out of the woods, clothes torn, face ghost white. He collapsed in front of the general store, screaming until his voice cracked. When they finally calmed him, he choked out what he'd seen near the river. A pit. A deep one, filled with bundles of cloth and bones, tiny bones, and the markings of something crawling in and out of the earth. But it wasn't just the pit. It was who he saw standing beside it. The Hollow Creek sisters, and 2 young men, tall, wild-eyed, barefoot like their mothers, skin pale like theirs, hair tangled the same way, moving with the same slow, unnatural grace. But the hunter swore something else, something that froze every drop of blood in Angus Merritt's veins. He said those young men had the sisters' faces, almost exactly, like reflections stretched into adulthood, like sons not born from any man, like brothers born from the same bloodline twice. And they stood there staring at him, expressionless, until one of them smiled, wide, too wide, showing small, sharp teeth like the baby had. Angus didn't want to believe it. He wanted to tell himself the hunter was mad, exhausted, imagining things. But then the hunter whispered something that made the sheriff's stomach twist into knots. They weren't just standing there, he said. They were waiting. For what? Angus asked. The hunter swallowed hard. for someone else to join the pit. That was the moment Angus realized Hollow Creek wasn't dealing with children, nor with simple madness. The sisters were building something. Growing something. A family not meant for daylight. And the town was next. That night, the moon hung unnaturally low, red as an open wound. Dogs refused to leave their yards. Chickens refused to make a sound. Even the river seemed to slow, moving thickly through the rocks like syrup. Then the screaming began. Not human, not animal. Something in between. Something born wrong. Something that shouldn't exist. Angus grabbed his rifle and ran toward Hollow Creek's edge, toward the black tree line where the sisters lived. But halfway there, he stopped dead. Because standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by the moon, was one of the brothers. Tall, pale, eyes glowing faintly, and smiling like he had been waiting for Angus all night. Behind him, the branches parted. Maeve and Lydia stepped into view, and between them, wrapped in a thin white cloth, something moved. Breathing. Squirming. Trying to push its way out, Lydia's voice drifted through the fog. "You came just in time, Sheriff." Maeve's smile widened. "Our family needs one more." Angus raised his rifle, and the cloth twitched violently. Something inside it whispered his name, not in a baby's voice. In the voice of a grown man, a man Angus buried years ago. His brother. The cloth split, and what crawled out wasn't human. The lantern shook in the man's trembling hand as he pushed deeper into the woods behind Hollow Creek. The trail was nearly gone, swallowed by roots, shifting soil, and the unnatural wind that always seemed to hum like a living thing. Only one sound cut through it tonight, a baby crying again. Except, it wasn't a baby. It hadn't been a baby for a long time. For years, the people of Hollow Creek tried to forget the strange cries emerging from the cabin of the Hollow Creek sisters. They tried to forget the way the earth seemed to pulse under that house, like something enormous was breathing beneath it. They tried to forget the boys. The brothers. The ones who never grew right, but forgetting didn't save the town. And now, after a second disappearance in a single month, the people had begun whispering a name again. The same name they once swore never to speak. The Hollow Children. The man stepped through the brush, every instinct in him screaming to turn back. He had seen tracks, child-sized but wrong. Toes too long, heel angled like a claw. He had followed the trail out of duty, but now, deep in the woods, he realized something chilling. The tracks were following him back. He dropped the lantern. Flame burst across the dirt and died instantly, smothered as if something had sucked the oxygen right out of the air. The forest exhaled. Then, from the darkness, a voice. Small. Fragile. "Close. Are you my brother?" The man ran, but Hollow Creek doesn't let its secrets go. Morning arrived with a dull, colorless light that barely touched the valley. Fog clung to the ground like it didn't want to leave. Sheriff Ambrose Caldwell stood outside his office, staring at the empty place where his deputy's horse should have been. That deputy was the man who followed the footprints last night. Caldwell spat in the dirt, not out of disrespect, out of fear. Real fear. The kind he hadn't felt since he was a boy, when the Hollow Creek sisters still lived in that cursed cabin and the town pretended nothing was wrong. But Caldwell never forgot. He remembered the day the older sister, Alma, carried the first infant into town, pale as moonlight, quiet as snowfall. Too quiet. He remembered the doctor refusing to touch the child. He remembered the way Alma said, "He's not sick. He's chosen." And he remembered the screams one winter later when the child disappeared, then returned. Changed. Caldwell locked the memory away for decades. Now it was clawing back to the surface. He mounted his horse and rode toward Hollow Creek Woods, hoping to find tracks, hoping to find anything that didn't confirm the suspicion building in his gut. But hope doesn't survive long in Hollow Creek. By the time he reached the forest edge, the fog was so thick the world looked carved out of chalk. He tied his horse to a dead stump and stepped in, boots sinking into mud that seemed too warm, like flesh instead of soil. As he moved deeper, something began happening around him. The forest was whispering, not wind. Words. Broken, overlapping, childlike words. "Help me." "Where are you?" "Cold." "Hungry." "Don't leave us." Caldwell froze. Those were the voices of town children. Children who had gone missing between 1880 and 1890. 10 in total. Each disappearance blamed on accidents, wolves, river currents. Every excuse except the truth. He followed the voices until he saw it through the fog. A shape. A structure. But not the cabin. This was something older. A collapsed root system, hollowed into a natural pit. Trees twisted above it like ribs. Inside, he saw bones. Too many bones. Piled. Scattered, half-buried. Some small, some huge. All discolored as though drained of every last drop of life. And at the center, a cradle. A cradle made of branches, held together by something that looked disturbingly like braided hair. Something was inside it. Something moving. Caldwell stepped closer, against every instinct in his soul. He leaned over the cradle just enough to see the baby. Except it wasn't a baby. Its skin was smooth and pale, but stretched too tight over its skull. Its eyes were enormous, black, reflective like oil. The legs folded the wrong way, jointed like an animal's. It blinked slowly, then smiled. Not a human smile. A widening, a stretching, as if the skin had to remember how to form the shape. And then it spoke, in a voice that was not a baby's voice, not a human voice. "Mama said you'd come." Caldwell stumbled back, nearly slipping on a skull half buried in the dirt. Then, from behind him, leaves crackled, followed by footsteps, soft, nimble, child-sized. But there were many. He turned. Shapes stood between the trees, small silhouettes. Dozens of them. Caldwell swallowed hard. He had seen children stand like that once before, 30 years ago, behind the Hollow Creek sisters' cabin, unmoving, silent, watching. And just like those children, these weren't alive. Not in any way that counted. One of them stepped forward, barefoot, skin pale as wet stone, eyes too wide. When it opened its mouth, Caldwell didn't hear speech. He heard a scream, not from one voice, from many voices, mixing together into one agonized sound, crying, begging, calling for help. Every missing child in Hollow Creek, every one of them. Caldwell turned and ran. He didn't care where he was going, as long as it wasn't deeper into this nightmare. The forest groaned, actually groaned, like a living creature shifting around him. And then he heard it. A voice. A woman's voice. Soft, careful, loving. "Sheriff Caldwell, you came home." He froze. That voice belonged to one of the Hollow Creek sisters, but they had been dead for decades. Sheriff Caldwell froze as that familiar voice drifted through the fog. A voice he hadn't heard since he was a boy. A voice that should have been rotting beneath Hollow Creek Cemetery. Alma Hollow, older of the Hollow Creek sisters, mother of the Hollow children, keeper of the curse. The fog shifted, swirling toward him like it was being pulled by someone's breath. Caldwell's heartbeat thundered in his ears as a shadow formed between the trees. A tall figure. A woman's silhouette. Hair long and tangled, like it hadn't been brushed in decades. Her voice came again, smooth, calm, impossibly gentle. "You always were a good boy, Ambrose. But you forgot us." Caldwell backed away, gripping his revolver. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely keep the barrel upward. "You're dead," he whispered. "You died 30 years ago." The silhouette stopped. Then, it smiled, not with lips, with the entire shape of its body. "We were never allowed to die." The air turned ice cold. Wind rushed through the woods in a circular motion, as if something enormous was waking beneath the earth. Caldwell stepped back, and his boot struck something soft. He glanced down. A hand. Gray, small, child-sized. It clutched his boot, weak but desperate. He kicked it off and stumbled away, but more hands began to reach through the soil. Tiny fingers, grasping, pulling themselves upward through the muddy ground, as if clawing out of shallow graves. The Hollow children. They rose in silence, bodies coated in dirt, eyes round and wide, reflecting the pale fog like mirrors. They moved with unnatural slowness, like puppets dragged by invisible strings. "Stop," Alma's voice whispered. "They only want their brother." Caldwell shook his head. "I'm not their brother." A pause. Then, soft but sharp, "Everyone in Hollow Creek is." A low rumbling began beneath the forest floor. Not thunder. This was something deeper, like a giant heartbeat pounding through the roots. The ground trembled, trees shivered, the fog thickened until it pressed against Caldwell's skin like damp cloth. Then, in an instant, it parted, revealing something behind it. The cabin. The original Hollow cabin, still standing, still intact, even though it had burned down in 1862. The wooden boards were warped and blackened, but whole. Windows cracked but glowing faintly with a warm amber light like lanterns burning inside. Caldwell felt his breath leave his body. The cabin was calling him. He stepped toward it, as if his limbs were no longer his own. Behind him, dozens of Hollow children followed, quiet, obedient, waiting. Alma's silhouette moved through the fog behind them, impossibly tall now, her spine bending at unnatural angles as she stepped into view. Her face was wrong, too pale, too smooth, too stretched. Her eyes black and reflective like the children's. She gestured toward the cabin. "You need to see what they became." Caldwell didn't want to go in, but the cabin wanted him to. He reached the door. It opened without being touched. Inside, everything smelled like soil and old wood. A fire glowed somewhere deeper inside, but no heat came from it. Every wall was covered in carvings, hundreds of symbols, dozens of faces, small handprints, some fresh, still wet with sap-like fluid. Then Caldwell saw something in the far corner, a rocking chair, rocking slowly. Even though no one sat in it, something wrapped in cloth lay in the seat. Swaddled, small, a baby, no larger than a newborn. But Caldwell knew there were no babies left in Hollow Creek, not living ones. He stepped closer, dread crushing his chest. As he reached the chair, the cloth shifted. Caldwell forced himself to pull it back and stared in horror. It wasn't a baby. It was a face, a twisted, unfinished face, flesh that had tried to grow into human shape but failed halfway. It blinked, then it spoke. "Mama says you're the last one." Caldwell stumbled backward, and the entire house exhaled. Every board, every beam, every wall. A long, slow breath. Behind him, the voices of children began whispering again, but louder now. Urgent. "Stay, stay, stay, be one of us." Alma's voice rose above them all. Hollow Creek must remain whole. Caldwell ran. He burst through the cabin door, sprinting into the fog as the hollow children shrieked behind him, dozens of voices twisting together into an inhuman wail. The forest closed around him. Roots rose from the ground, trying to trip him. Branches swung low like hands reaching to drag him back. He didn't stop until the fog thinned and he stumbled into the clearing near his horse. He jumped on the saddle. But something was wrong. The horse wasn't breathing. Its eyes were black, reflective, just like theirs. Caldwell leaped off and ran on foot, forcing his legs to keep moving until he saw the first lights of Hollow Creek Town through the trees. He didn't look back, not when he heard small footsteps behind him, not when he heard Alma's voice echoing through the woods. "You can't leave family, Ambrose." Not even when he heard that awful low rumble beneath the earth, the heartbeat of Hollow Creek itself. Caldwell didn't survive the night. They found him collapsed outside the sheriff's office. Stone cold, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. The doctor said he died of fright. The townspeople knew better. On his boots, they found tiny handprints made of mud. Exactly 10 of them, for each of the missing children. And from that day on, as long as Hollow Creek existed, the same rumor passed from parent to child. If you hear a baby crying in the woods, don't go looking. It isn't a baby. It's one of the Hollow children, calling for their brother. And they always find him. Eventually, the truth about Hollow Creek didn't die in 1892. It lives beneath the soil, in the fog, in every whisper the wind carries down those old mountains. The sisters may be gone, but their children never left. And if you ever travel through the Appalachians and hear a baby crying in the trees, don't look. Don't answer. Don't even breathe. Because once the Hollow children notice you, they don't stop until you belong to them. This was Forgotten Remains, where the past is never buried, and the dead never stay dead.